Hi, my name is Pam Traylor, and I'm an instructional coach for early childhood. I'm here to present to you today culturally responsive teaching in early childhood. Our objectives are to explore the concept of culture, define culturally responsive teaching, show the goals and benefits of culturally responsive teaching, explore conditions for learning, explore culturally responsive practices, explore culturally responsive environments, and explore culturally responsive strategies. Culture is defined as the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. People from different cultures learn in different ways. Their expectations for learning may be different. For example, students from some cultural groups prefer to learn in cooperation with others, while the learning style of others is to work independently. Children from homes in which the language and culture do not closely correspond to that of the school may be at a disadvantage in the learning process. These children often become alienated and feel disengaged from learning. Let's reflect for a minute. What do you know about culturally responsive teaching? Think about that for a second. Write some notes down. Culturally responsive teaching is using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, and performance styles of diverse students to make learning more appropriate and effective for them. It teaches to and through strengths of these students. The goal of culturally responsive teaching is to create a learning environment conducive to all students, no matter their ethnic, cultural, or linguistic backgrounds. The benefits of culturally responsive teaching is a more positive classroom learning environment, more efficient use of class time, higher quality instruction, higher percentage of on-task students, and greater student engagement. When we make things personal for children and it's about things that they like or that they know, they're more inclined to engage in the learning. Benefits of culturally responsive anti bias education for all children. It encourages a true sense of self by helping children from all cultural backgrounds engage in positive identity development. It promotes healthy development of all children. It prepares children for the future by helping them develop cross cultural skills that will be needed to fully participate in society. And it prevents social isolation. Some critical conditions for learning are that number one, your students need to feel safe. The learners must be and feel safe in your presence. You need support. Learners must feel connected to teachers and the learning setting. We're going to talk a little bit later about how important those relationships are. Social emotional learning. Learners need to learn to manage their emotions and relationships, and we teach them that through Second Step. Engagement and challenge. Learners need to be actively engaged in the learning endeavors. And again, when we make it personal and something that they know, they are more inclined to engage in that learning. Providing a learning environment inclusive of diverse needs and styles. Provide an environment free of prejudice and stereotyping. And involve parents and families into the life of the classroom. Those are all critical things for learning. So think about your classroom environment before COVID, obviously. How did your learning environment meet these critical learning conditions? I'm going to go back. Did you feel like that your students always felt safe with you and in your classroom, in the school? Do you think they felt supported and had a connection between you, between the all the staff in the classroom, between the kids? Were you good at teaching the social emotional learning and helping kids regulate their emotions and being able to express themselves in positive ways? Did you engage them and challenge them? Did you provide an environment that was inclusive of their diverse needs and styles? Was your environment free from prejudice and stereotyping? And did you involve your parents and families into the life of the classroom as much as they could possibly be? So let's look at the physical environment. So these are questions that you want to ask yourself when looking at your classroom. Are the materials and equipment in my classroom easily accessible to everyone? Do all children have the opportunity to participate in activities? These are your ECE kids, your kids with disabilities, physical, it doesn't matter. All kids that are in your care, do they have the ability to participate in all the activities? Does your classroom display pictures of the children, their families, and include materials that relate to their background and experiences? Does your classroom provide equal representation of images and materials reflecting different cultures and ethnicities, different family styles and compositions, different age groups across the different lifestyles, different genders and non stereotypical roles? Are there dolls and clothing that represent male and female and different ethnicities or skin color? Is there a wide variety of art material that students can use to accurately represent their physical characteristics? We hit a lot of this with Eckers, and we've done a great job ordering materials and making sure that we have the play materials necessary in order to be able to show a diverse the diverse needs in your classroom. But it's not finished. We still need to do more. We need to understand and know who our kids are and where they come from so that we can take that background and those experiences and put those into our classroom so that they can learn from those and that becomes a personal learning experience. Teachers should develop a learning environment that is relevant and reflective of their students' social, cultural, and linguistic experiences. They act as guides, mediators, consultants, instructors, and advocates for the students, helping to effectively connect their culturally and community based knowledge to the classroom learning experiences. And as I said before, the most important piece of this puzzle is those relationships. Relationships. The learning is, yes, cognitive, but it's also that social, emotional as well. Children tend to learn when they have that personal connection, that relationship with the people who are teaching them. And it's so important for you to have those relationships with your students. There are 5 culturally responsive core strategies to promote those positive teacher student relationships. Number 1, learn about your children and their families. Develop and teach expectations. Take the child's perspective. Teach and model empathy, and use group times to discuss conflict. We're going to take a moment and go through each one of these. First, learning about children and families that are in your classroom. A core consideration in developmentally appropriate practice and cultural responsiveness is that teachers learn about each child and family and intentionally adapt and respond to each child's strengths and needs. Whether it's an informal chat as the parent brings the child to school, a phone conversation, your home visits, or newsletter sent home, Teachers' dialogue with family members can result in learning about each of the families through genuine communication. And then teachers can partner with families by inviting them to visit the classroom and participate in activities with the child. We learn so much from going to the home visits. We learn about their family dynamics. We learn about their loves. Do they have pets? What do they like to play with? Um, do they have playground equipment kind of outside? Do they like to go to the park? Do they read books? Have materials in their home? Do they have things that they play with in their home? We can use all of that information in order to teach our children. So we build our lessons around the things that they love and be able to teach them through those things. Parents are the child's first teacher and can give great insight into how they learn and what their interests are. When families share their funds of knowledge, I hope you remember that previous professional development, with teachers, they can get a better idea of the student's background and incorporate that into the child's learning. The second approach is to develop and teach expectations. So we want to teach 2 to 5 classroom expectations that are linked to the values and cultures of the children, teachers, and families. The expectations should be positively stated and developmentally appropriate and should apply to both children and adults in the classroom. What we expect of our children, we need to also expect of adults. If we're expecting our children to be respectful and kind and sharing with children, we also need our adults to be kind and respectful of each other. Children should be included in forming guidelines for behavior, as they are more likely to understand and follow them when they have input. Expectations should be consistently emphasized to prevent challenging behavior. Going over those expectations every single day so that the children know exactly what they are to do. We we give such great emphasis on routines and having those schedules because children need those to be successful. They do not need to get off when they do get off of that schedule. When you veer from that schedule, it can cause chaos in the classroom. And so we have to teach the children what the changes that are going to happen and what we need to do when those changes come. And to reinforce positive behavior and to bring the actions to children's attention. It's important to verbally acknowledge children and adults when they demonstrate expectations. Effective and consistent communication of expectations helps students develop a healthy self concept. Expectations provide the structure for intrinsic motivation, which is what we want them to get to, and fosters an environment in which the student can be successful. Next one is taking the child's perspective. Perspective taking is defined as the capacity to understand another's thoughts, feelings, or internal states. I, I really liked this example. And so I wanted to put this on to share with you. So it was talking about a child who was in the lunchroom, and right after lunch, they always went outside to play. And so this one particular child would run as fast as he could with his tray to get to the garbage can and dump his trash out and push people aside and everything to get to the front of the line. And of course, a teacher might say, stop running. If you run, you and your friends are not safe. But if the teacher takes the child's perspective and says, you know what? I see that you are really excited about going outside. And thank you for putting your trash away. But please remember to use your walking feet and move around your friends. There's always a reason for their behavior, positive or negative. And so if we get to understand why it is and get their perspective on things, then we can turn those things into a positive reflection for these kids. Develop and teach empathy. So, empathy is a concern for others arising from an emotional connection. So, empathetic individuals apply interpersonal sensitivity to understand the experiences of others in order to provide support or assistance. Teachers can help children learn empathetic behavior by modeling warm and responsive actions, like anticipating and responding promptly to children's needs and worries, and greeting children with a smile. Using storybooks, games, and music are great ways to teach empathy. And whether subconscious or explicit, teachers' negative perceptions about children who differ from them in terms of culture or race or ethnic identity can impact the teacher's ability to teach effectively and create empathetic classrooms. I'd like to share a story. This was back when I was in St. Louis and I was teaching a fourth grade classroom. And some of my teachers have heard this story before, but I had a student, his name was Parker, and he would come into my classroom every single day. And within the first 45 minutes of school beginning, he would fall asleep. And he slept probably most of the morning until we went to lunch. And I had to really get to know the family and understand the background. And one day, the principal came by, and came into my classroom and saw Parker was sleeping in the back of the room. And she told me that I needed to give him a detention, that he needed to stay after school for sleeping in class. And I had to, first tell the principal that, I would need to meet with her one on one, which I did. And I had to explain to her the situation and the fact that what was going on with Parker. So knowing my students and communicating with the families, I knew that Parker had a father who was in prison, a mother who was working two jobs. She was working one in the midday, and then she was working a night job. He also had a little sister who was about 14 months old at the time. Guess who was taking care of his sister at night? He was. His mom was gone working, and when the baby would get up in the middle of the night and cry and needed to be fed, he was the one doing that. When she needed her diaper changed in the middle of the night, he was the one getting up and doing that. And so I developed an empathy for his situation because he couldn't control that. But had I not known his background and had I not built that relationship with the family, I would never have known what was going on and he would have gotten those detentions. And so I set up a meeting with the mom and got permission from her for him to stay after school with me for a little while. And I worked with him one on one to give him the skills and the development that we did during the day, and helped him with homework and with studying for tests or quizzes. And I really took the time to meet his needs where he was in his life. And without empathy, that would never have occurred. So use group times to discuss conflict. So this allows for those involved in the conflict an opportunity for reconciliation. Problem solving as a group can foster active engagement and learning and enable children and adults to build strong relationships. The teacher can establish the tone for the group by reading a poem, listening to a song, or reading a story about friendship. Although many children benefit from the use of group time to address conflict, and this approach can promote inclusion instead of exclusion like timeouts, it is important to develop methods and awareness so children do not feel ashamed rather than part of a trusting community of problem solvers. So one thing I did as well as a kindergarten teacher is when my students were off in their centers and I would see a conflict or I would see something happening, we would stop. Everybody would stop in their group and we would come together. on the carpet, and we would talk about what I saw. I would not point out the person because I did not want them to feel guilt or shame or embarrassed in any way. But we talked about that I saw something in the classroom and I wanted to talk about it. And how do you think the person felt? And what could we have done differently? And sometimes we did some role playing. And that's a way to really make your classroom a community and to understand that even though there may be conflict from two or three people over here, we come together and we solve that conflict as a community, as a family in our classroom. And doing that and during group times is a perfect way to do that. So reflect for a minute about what strategy do you feel like is a strength for you? And what is an area of growth? Maybe you are really good at communicating with families. Maybe you are really good at having that group time to solve conflicts. Maybe you're awesome at that social emotional. And maybe you have an area of growth that you need, that you really want to get the families involved more in the classroom. Maybe you want to add more languages in your classroom. I know that a lot of times we go in and we see a lot of labeling that obviously in English, but some in Spanish too. But are there other languages in your classroom that maybe you can add, that you can put up, that you can use as labels, that you can have families come in and talk to you about what those words mean, and be able to interact with the students? Well, let's talk a little bit about some culturally responsive practices. So, help students access prior knowledge and the beliefs that they have. Build on those students' interests. What are the things that they love? And take that knowledge and use it to teach them. If you have a child who is so interested in cars, then I'm going to use that in my as a teaching method. I'm going to use that in counting, in looking at colors, measuring, putting those together and measuring, talking about community helpers and how we use cars to go to the grocery store and we can meet a community helper there or to the library. I'm going to use that interest any way I can to help that child learn. If you have a child who loves dolls, baby dolls, I'm going to use that to talk about um, colors on clothing, measuring of their hair. If you have a baby doll that has hair, maybe we're going to talk about the seasons and how we would dress appropriately in those seasons using the dolls. Maybe we can do some role playing or talking back and forth among the dolls to teach a social emotional skill. There are so many things you can do when you learn the interests of your kids and build that relationship. You want to build on the student's language. Again, like I said earlier, adding those that language into the classroom, whether it being labels, things on the wall, books that you have in your classroom, materials that you have in your classroom. You want to give them that opportunity to learn with what is comfortable for them. Use real examples and analogies from students' lives. Again, that's from developing relationships and talking to your families. Use appropriate instructional materials that relate to students' backgrounds and interests, and create different paths to learning by using varied instructional activities. Respect cultural differences and understand that these differences are not deficits. Just because someone is not the same as you does not make them any less than you. Provide hands on instruction for your children. Recognize efforts as well as accomplishments. Sometimes we don't always accomplish what we set out to do, but when we put forth the effort, that needs to be recognized and celebrated as well. That goes not only for students, but for the adults in our classroom as well. Use multiple methods to teach so that you can reach all students' learning styles. We all learn differently, in different ways, and in different times. Create an environment that reflects cultural and linguistic diversity. Use role playing strategies. Those are so important. Teach and talk to students about differences between individuals. Why are we different? Different colors. Why is our hair different? Those are all, why do we live in different places? Those are all great things to talk about so that we can mesh together as a community of students in a classroom. Show how differences among students make for better learning. We can learn from each other and our differences. We're going to talk for a second about culturally responsive books. Books are wonderful for so many things. When having book discussions, prompt that deeper thinking about text by asking questions such as, how would you feel if, or what do you think, or why do you think this happened, or tell me more about. This can foster critical conversations with learners about gender roles and ethnic differences. So, if we're looking at a book about where we're at now, community helpers, and we see a firefighter in one of our books, and the firefighter is a male, we can talk about how females can be firefighters and that males can be teachers and females can be police officers and so on and so forth. And that way we can teach our children that gender is simply gender. It's boy versus girl, but it does not define what we can do in our lives. And you can spark that conversation. What do you think would happen if you were a firefighter? How would you feel if you walked up to a building that was a burning building? Do you think you would feel scared? Tell me more about that. Many of you use music for transitions mostly, and obviously have some music with your music center. But have you ever given thought to the music you are playing? Consider playing music across various genres. Have you played um, blues music? Have you played um, classical music in your classroom? Have you introduce some different genres, just maybe in the background as you're eating in the classroom, as you are doing transitions, putting it on during center time, even during rest. Consider playing music that reflects different cultures represented in your classroom. So maybe at the music center, you can have, if you have a Native American child in your classroom, play some music from the Native American culture so that they can hear what that sounds like and gives them great comfort. When integrated into classroom instruction, culturally responsive strategies can have important benefits, such as strengthening students' sense of identity, promoting equity and inclusivity in the classroom, engaging students in the materials because they feel connected to it, supporting critical thinking. When you think about and reflect on culturally diverse children and families and communities, think to yourself, how can I better serve culturally diverse children, their families, and their communities? What do I need to become a culturally competent and responsive practitioner, teacher in my classroom? What does my program need to be more inclusive of diverse children and families? What barriers exist that prevents me or my program from being more inclusive and equitable? We have done a we have made a whole lot of progress in getting these materials, getting these things into our classroom so that these children can experience things that are on a personal level and things that they see every single day, but we're not all the way there. And we need to know, what can we do to move in this direction and to make sure we become more inclusive and equitable. And we want to hear that. So when that you are in the classrooms every single day, you are dealing with the issues and not having things that you need, and not being able to support children that you want to be able to support, or those families. And we need to know what you need in order to do that. So if you come across things, please write it down, give it to your instructional coach so we can pass on to Jimmy or to Rena, so that we can figure out a way to move in this positive direction of making our classrooms more inclusive and more equitable for all students. Culturally responsive teaching. It's critical teaching requires teachers to admit that they do not know everything. We can learn from our students by listening to them. We need to document, respect, and learn about people from all over the world, particularly those who are dramatically different from us. Culturally responsive teaching reminds us that everyone brings something to the table and everyone has value. Look for the strengths and assets within your students, within their families and their communities, and bring those to your classroom. And one more thing I want to say, parting words here, and this is something that I found from James Baldwin. Not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Let's move in a positive direction to include all children and give them all the advantages that they need to be successful. Thank you so much for being with me today. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Please email me if you have any questions or concerns. You will have a quiz that you need to do after this, and please submit that. Thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend.